that, but somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest far right.
We just passed the 40th federal observation of Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And let me tell you, this year felt different. The political climate right now is intense, and it's got people asking some really fundamental questions about what Dr. King's legacy actually means in 2026. So here's the situation. This MLK Day fell exactly 1 year after Donald Trump's second inauguration, and in that year, a lot has happened. We've seen major rollbacks of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Federal law enforcement operations have targeted mostly Black-led cities. And just recently, Trump made some comments to the New York Times that really stirred things up. He said the civil rights movement and the reforms it helped create were actually harmful to white people, who he claims were very badly treated. Now, whether you agree with that or not, you can see why this year's MLK Day became less about quiet reflection and more about rallying and reclaiming. Different groups are interpreting King's message in completely different ways, and I think that tension is worth exploring. Let me start with a perspective that really struck me. Pastor Corey Brooks recently walked across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Alabama as part of his Walk Across America campaign. And he wrote something powerful about what he experienced. He talked about feeling the full weight of that bridge's history, the blood of civil rights foot soldiers, the courage of Dr. King and everyone who marched alongside him. But then he asked a haunting question. What would Dr. King think if he could see Chicago's South Side today? And here's where it gets real. Pastor Brooks doesn't sugarcoat it. He describes the South Side as a present-day living crisis, gunfire echoing through neighborhoods where kids should be playing, poverty visible everywhere, littered streets, broken windows, abandoned buildings, schools passing on failing kids, families torn apart not by white supremacy, he says, but by neglect, fatherlessness, and what he calls a culture that embraces dependency over free will. That's a bold statement, and whether you agree with his framing or not, I think it's worth hearing out. Pastor Brooks then goes after something that's going to be controversial for some viewers, the Black Lives Matter movement. He points out that BLM exploded onto the scene in 2020 and brought in billions of dollars in donations. One of its founders reportedly called it white guilt money. Corporations and celebrities poured in fortunes, virtue signaling their way to what he calls absolution. But his question is simple. Where did that money go? He says it didn't go to the South Side's crumbling schools, not to job training programs, not to mentoring for at-risk youth. Instead, he claims, it lined the pockets of a few, funding mansions while the Black underclass continues to struggle. Now, he's speaking from experience here. As the founder of Project H.O.O.D, helping others obtain destiny, he's building the first new building in his neighborhood in over 50 years. They provide job training and fight daily battles against despair, and he says they haven't received a dime from what he calls the grievance industry. His words, not mine. But I think there's a point here worth considering, that Dr. King didn't march for performative activism or luxury homes. He marched for self-reliance, family, faith, and the promise that hard work could lift anyone. Now, let's flip the script, because there's another perspective that's equally passionate. Maya Wiley, president of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, says the Trump administration is actively trying to erase the civil rights movement. She points to rollbacks in healthcare access, affordable housing, union representation, all things Dr. King advocated for. And then there's the incident this month in Minneapolis. An unarmed woman named Renee Good was fatally shot by ICE agents while in her car. She was a mother of 3. The agents were there targeting the city's Somali immigrant population. For many people, this is exactly the kind of thing that makes them fear a regression from the social progress King fought for.
Maryland Governor Wes Moore, the first Black governor in Maryland's history, put it this way: the civil rights movement was one of the things that made our country so unique. We haven't always been perfect, but we've always strived to be a more perfect union. That's a different framing than what Pastor Brooks is offering, but I don't think they're entirely incompatible. Here's where it gets interesting. The Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank, is encouraging people to focus on King himself. They want people to visit the MLK National Historical Park in Atlanta or reread his I Have a Dream speech. But here's their argument. Using the holiday as a platform to rally about anti-racism and critical race theory actually rejects what King believed in. Their researcher, Brenda Hafera, says King's vision was a colorblind society, judging people by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. Meanwhile, groups like the Movement for Black Lives are organizing under the banner Reclaim MLK Day of Action. They had demonstrations planned in Atlanta, Chicago, Oakland, and other cities. Their message? That it's more important than ever to reclaim King's radical legacy and fight back against what they call a fascist regime. So you've got two very different interpretations of the same man's legacy. One side saying King wanted colorblindness and individual responsibility. The other side saying King was a radical who would be out in the streets protesting right now. And here's something that concerns me. Some events are being canceled. Indiana University in Indianapolis canceled its annual Martin Luther King dinner for the first time in 60 years. Officially, it's budget constraints, but their Black student union worries it's connected to broader political pressures. A Catholic church in Maine canceled an MLK Day service because the pastor was concerned about people's safety amid rumors of ICE agents in the area. Think about that. People are afraid to gather and celebrate a civil rights icon because they're worried about immigration enforcement. Whether you think those fears are justified or overblown, the fact that they exist tells you something about where we are right now. So what's my take on all this? I think Pastor Brooks makes a valid point. Dr. King didn't die so that expectations could be lowered for Black communities. He didn't march for dependency or handouts. He marched for opportunity, for dignity, for the chance to prove yourself on equal footing. But I also think we can't ignore the structural barriers that still exist. The rollback of civil rights protections isn't nothing. The fear in immigrant communities isn't nothing. The shooting of an unarmed mother isn't nothing. Maybe, and this is just me thinking out loud, maybe both things can be true. Maybe we need to demand more from ourselves and demand more from our institutions. Maybe personal responsibility and systemic accountability aren't opposites. Dr. King dreamed of a beloved community. He spoke of the promised land in his final speech before he was assassinated. And whether you interpret that through a conservative lens or a progressive lens, I think we can all agree we're not there yet. The South Side needs development. Communities need jobs, mentorship, fathers and homes, schools that work. But communities also need protection from unjust policies, from discriminatory enforcement, from leaders who dismiss their struggles. Pastor Brooks said it best. Martin Luther King Jr. may be long gone, but his vision remains within reach. We must seek it or perish. That's my take. Drop your thoughts below. I genuinely want to hear different perspectives on this. And if you found this valuable, hit subscribe. This is the Vanguard Watch. Peace out.